The rain came down like punishment from the heavens, cold, relentless, and unending. It blurred the city's edges until everything dissolved into streaks of gray and gold under the flickering streetlights. Cars hissed through puddles along Monroe Street, and David Mitchell walked without purpose, head bent beneath the downpour, the collar of his black wool coat pulled tight around his throat. He hadn't meant to stay late at the lawyer's office. The words still echoed through him like the final nails in a coffin. Sarah's affairs are all in order now. 6 months. It had been 6 months since the crash that tore his world apart, and yet every day since he'd woken to the same emptiness. The same silence in a penthouse that once pulsed with laughter and love. David used to command boardrooms with ease, decisions worth millions riding on a flick of his pen. Now he couldn't decide whether to go left or right. He had built an empire that didn't need him anymore. Mitchell Technologies practically ran itself, as though the machine had outlived its maker. And maybe it had. His Italian shoes splashed through puddles he didn't bother to avoid. The city didn't look at him and he didn't look at it. Until the sound of footsteps, small and frantic, pierced the rhythm of the rain. He looked up just as something collided with his legs, nearly knocking him backward. "Please," a small voice gasped. "Please, mister, just pretend you're hugging me." David blinked, stunned. A little girl stood before him, trembling so hard her soaked dress clung to her thin frame like second skin. Her dark hair was plastered against her cheeks, her eyes wide with raw terror. Before he could speak, she pressed herself against him, her tiny arms wrapping tightly around his waist. Behind her came the voices. "Emma, you get back here right now!" 2 men in security uniforms emerged from the mist, faces flushed and angry. David's pulse jumped. The girl looked up at him then, pleading, desperate, and utterly broken. Something ancient and protective stirred in him. Without a word, he bent and wrapped his arms around her, shielding her small body with his own. "Emma, sweetheart," he said, his voice rising above the rain, steady and authoritative. "There you are. Daddy was looking everywhere for you." The guards froze. David met their eyes, his expression calm, but his tone steel. "Is there a problem?" The taller guard shifted uneasily. "Sir, that child belongs to Riverside Children's Home. Are you accusing me of not knowing my own daughter?" David interrupted, the edge in his voice sharp enough to cut through the storm. The shorter guard stammered. "No, sir, it's just that you've made a mistake," David said. "And I suggest you correct it before I contact my attorney." The guards exchanged glances, then slowly backed away. "Our apologies, sir," one mumbled. "Must have been the wrong girl." As their footsteps faded, David felt Emma's grip loosen, though she didn't let go entirely. Her forehead rested against his chest, her breathing ragged and uneven. "Thank you," she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. David looked down at her, this fragile, frightened child who had appeared like a ghost out of the rain, and for the first time in half a year something inside him cracked. The numbness that had blanketed his heart began to thaw, replaced by a faint aching warmth. He crouched to her level, brushing a strand of wet hair from her cheek. "Emma," he murmured. "Who are you running from?" Her lip trembled. "They were going to take my brother. He's only 5. I couldn't let them." David didn't understand everything, but he understood fear. He saw it in her eyes, the same kind he had once seen in his own reflection after Sarah's funeral. "Come on," he said softly, rising to his feet and taking her small hand. "You can tell me everything later." She hesitated, staring up at him with a mix of suspicion and hope, then nodded. Together, they stepped into the downpour. The city lights shimmered against the wet pavement as they disappeared down the street. A broken man and a lost child, bound by a lie that would soon change both their lives forever. Neither of them looked back. The stranger's shelter. The rain didn't ease as they walked. It came harder, sharp as nails, slashing against their skin as if the night itself were testing their resolve. The streets of downtown Chicago glimmered under the watery glow of streetlights, every puddle a mirror reflecting the chaos above. David's grip on Emma's small hand tightened each time a car splashed by too close. She stayed close beside him, tiny feet struggling to keep up, her breath coming in quick bursts. She didn't speak, didn't ask who he was or where they were going. She just trusted him, completely, blindly, with the kind of trust that could only be born from desperation. When they reached the Four Seasons, the doorman blinked in shock. David Mitchell was rarely seen these days, and never with company, least of all a drenched little girl who looked like she'd crawled out of a storm drain. But he said nothing. Wealth was its own disguise. Mr. Mitchell, the concierge greeted with polished warmth as they crossed the marble lobby. His eyes flickered briefly to Emma, but David's steady, commanding expression silenced any questions. "Your usual suite?" "Yes," David said, voice firm. "And some food brought up. Something warm. For both of us." "Of course, sir." They rode the elevator in silence. Emma's sneakers squeaked on the polished floor, leaving tiny puddles behind her. The golden light inside made her eyes shimmer, a soft brown that carried too much pain for someone so young. David glanced at her reflection in the mirrored walls. "You're safe now," he said. She didn't look at him. "Nobody's ever safe," she murmured, her voice so faint he almost didn't hear. The words struck him harder than he expected. For a heartbeat he saw Sarah again, her smile, her courage, her hand reaching for him through twisted metal and flame. His throat tightened. When the elevator doors slid open, Emma's eyes went wide. The penthouse was vast, almost unreal. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the storm raging over Lake Michigan, its waves slamming into the shore like fists. The furniture gleamed untouched. The air smelled faintly of cedar and money. Emma froze near the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the imported rug. Her gaze darted from the glittering chandelier to the enormous couch and the glass fireplace flickering to life. "Go on," David said gently. "It's just a couch." She didn't move. "Are you going to send me back?" "No," he said, too quickly, too firmly. "Not tonight." Her shoulders eased a little, but her eyes stayed cautious, as though she'd learned that comfort often came with a price. David disappeared briefly into the bathroom, returning with a white towel. He handed it to her. She took it carefully, clutching it like treasure. "Here," he said, crouching down to meet her eyes. "You're shivering. Dry off." She hesitated, then nodded and began rubbing her arms, her small hands trembling from the cold. Her lips were almost blue. "Sit by the fire," he urged. "You'll warm up faster." She edged closer to the flames but didn't sit until he did. Only when she saw him lower himself into the armchair did she curl up on the rug like a kitten seeking heat. A knock came at the door. "Room service." David stood, his voice soft but measured as he took the tray. "Thank you." The waiter's eyes flicked again toward Emma, then away. No questions. Money was a better silencer than truth. David placed the tray on the coffee table. Grilled cheese sandwiches, tomato soup, and cocoa. The smell filled the room, rich and comforting. Emma's stomach growled audibly and she flushed with embarrassment. "Eat," David said. She obeyed without hesitation. The first bite vanished before he'd even sat back down. By the third, tears streamed down her cheeks. "Hey," he said quietly, unsure whether to comfort her or give her space. She shook her head. "I'm okay." But the words came out broken, half swallowed by sobs. It's warm." David looked away. He couldn't remember the last time something so small, so human, had touched him like this. After she'd eaten, she leaned back against the couch, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered, voice thick with sleep. "You didn't have to help me." "I know," he said softly, "but I wanted to." For the first time she smiled, small, tired but real. And before he could say anything else, she curled up and fell asleep right there on the couch, the towel slipping from her shoulders. David sat watching her for a long time. The fire painted her face in soft orange light, and for a fleeting second, he imagined what his life might have looked like if Sarah were still alive, if they'd had a daughter. He exhaled shakily and rubbed his temples. What was he doing? Harboring a runaway from a state orphanage, lying to security officers. If this got out, he could lose everything. But when Emma stirred in her sleep and murmured, "Don't take Tommy," his chest constricted. He rose quietly, fetched a blanket and draped it over her small frame. Then he stood by the window, staring out at the storm. Chicago pulsed with distant sirens and streaks of lightning. Somewhere out there was Tommy, a 5-year-old boy about to be torn from the only family he had left. Somewhere out there were men who wanted Emma back, not because they cared, but because control was profitable. He didn't know why it mattered so much. He only knew one thing: he couldn't let her go back. The clock struck midnight. David poured himself a glass of scotch but didn't drink it. He sat in silence, the sound of rain and Emma's soft breathing filling the void. For the first time in 6 months, the silence didn't hurt quite as much. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Lawyers, police, scandal, but he knew this. Something inside him had shifted. The grief hadn't disappeared. But beneath it, a spark had reignited. Outside, lightning fractured the clouds, and for a brief instant David saw his reflection in the window. Not the hollow man who had lost everything, but a protector, a father, a man standing at the edge of something he didn't yet understand. And behind him, the little girl who had begged a stranger for a hug, slept safely for the first time in years. Neither of them knew it yet, but the night had already begun rewriting both their fates. The girl and the ghost morning came softly, sneaking through the thick curtains like a timid guest afraid to disturb the peace. For the first time in months, David Mitchell had slept without waking to nightmares. The steady rhythm of rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the faint glow of sunrise shimmered against the lake outside. He sat at the marble kitchen counter, fingers wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee, watching the small figure sleeping on his couch. Emma was curled beneath the blanket he'd placed over her, one arm dangling, her face half buried in the pillow. Something about the way she slept, with her body folded tight, as if ready to run even in her dreams, tore at him. He'd seen suffering before in boardrooms and bankruptcies, in men losing fortunes, but this was different. This was innocence bruised. When she stirred, blinking awake, her eyes darted around the room in alarm until they landed on him. Only then did her breathing slow. "Good morning," he said gently. She hesitated, then mumbled, "Morning." Her voice was raspy, small. She rubbed her eyes, then froze, as though realizing she'd fallen asleep somewhere she wasn't supposed to. "It's okay," David reassured her. "You're safe." Emma sat up slowly, her tiny hands clutching the blanket like armor. "I didn't mean to sleep," she whispered. I was tired. You needed it." He tried to smile, but it felt foreign on his face. "There's breakfast." Her eyes flickered toward the tray. Eggs. Toast, fruit, but she didn't move. "Emma," he said softly, "you don't have to ask permission to eat here." That broke something in her. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded and began to eat, slowly at first, as though afraid it would be taken away. David watched in silence, the sound of clinking silverware oddly grounding. He'd forgotten what it felt like to care whether another person ate. "Where's your brother now?" he asked after a moment. Her fork froze midair. "They said some rich people were coming to see him. People who want to adopt him?" She nodded. "But not me," David frowned. "Why not you?" "They said I'm too old, and that I talk too much, that nobody wants girls who talk back." Her voice trembled and she bit her lip, trying to stop it. "But Tommy's scared all the time. He can't sleep if I'm not there. They can't just take him." David's stomach twisted. He'd spent his whole adult life dealing in logic, systems, and control. Yet here was a little girl facing the impossible, her world torn apart by people who claimed to know what was best for her. "Tell me about this place," he said. "Riverside." Emma hesitated, glancing toward the window as if afraid the rain itself might be listening. "It's bad," she whispered. "They say it's for kids like us, but it's not. The older boys hit the little ones. Some of the workers are nice, but others, they hurt you if you don't listen." David leaned forward. "What do you mean, hurt you?" She shook her head. "You don't want to know?" "Yes," he said firmly, his tone soft but unwavering. "I do," her voice cracked. "One night Tommy got sick. He had a fever and I asked for a doctor. They said no, said he'd be fine by morning. I tried to sneak him water, but one of the men saw me. She stopped, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He locked me in the laundry room all night." David's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He wanted to find that man, that facility, that system, and burn it to the ground. "Emma," he said finally, "I'm not going to let them take him. I promise." She met his eyes, and for the first time he saw a flicker of hope there, a fragile light trembling in the darkness. "You really mean it?" "Yes," his voice didn't waver. "I've kept a lot of promises in my life, but this one matters more than all of them." A knock shattered the silence. David stiffened. Emma's eyes widened in panic. She darted behind the couch like a startled bird. "Stay there," he whispered. He opened the door. It was Robert Chen, his lawyer and oldest friend. Sharp suit, tired eyes, briefcase in hand. David. Robert sighed, stepping in. Do you have any idea what time it is? He paused when he noticed the child peering over the back of the couch. Oh my God, you weren't kidding. David closed the door behind him. Keep your voice down. Robert set his briefcase on the counter, pinching the bridge of his nose. You can't just take a child from a government facility, David. That's kidnapping. She wasn't safe there, David snapped. You didn't see her face. I don't need to, Robert said. I need to keep you out of prison. Emma stepped forward timidly. He didn't kidnap me, she said, her voice trembling but steady. I asked him to help me. Robert turned toward her, his expression softening instantly. Emma, he said carefully, where are your parents? Dead, she replied simply. Fire. Me and Tommy got out, but they didn't. Robert exhaled slowly, the weight of it hitting him. How old is your brother? 5. David crossed his arms. We need to find him before they move him. Robert hesitated, then opened his briefcase. I've already made a few calls. I pulled the public record on Riverside. You were right to trust your instincts. It's bad. There are sealed reports of injuries, missing children, foster placements that don't exist on file. Illegal adoptions? David asked. Worse, Robert replied grimly. Human trafficking disguised as charitable foster programs. David's blood ran cold. Jesus Christ, Robert looked at him, eyes narrowing. If you go after them, this won't stay quiet. You'll be exposing high-level donors, government officials, maybe even judges. You'll burn everything you built. David turned toward the little girl who was now staring at the floor, clutching the blanket again. Then I'll burn it, he said quietly. All of it. The silence that followed was electric. The city beyond the glass pulsed with early traffic, the world resuming its rhythm. But inside that suite, something larger was being set in motion. Emma stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you going to save Tommy? David looked down at her, his eyes dark with determination. Yes, he said. But not just Tommy, he turned to Robert. We're going to take down Riverside. Robert sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're insane. Maybe, David said. But maybe insanity's what it takes to do the right thing. He looked out the window again. The rain had finally stopped, and for the first time in months the sunlight broke through the clouds. It spilled across the glass, gilding the skyline in gold. Behind him, Emma climbed onto the couch, resting her head on the armrest, exhaustion tugging at her once more. But as her eyes fluttered closed, her lips curved into a faint, sleepy smile, and in that fragile peace, the first real peace she'd known in years, David Mitchell made a silent vow. He had lost one family to fate. He would not lose another to corruption. He didn't yet know that his path toward redemption would drag him into the darkest corners of power, deceit, and betrayal. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the grief and guilt, something fierce and alive had awakened. It wasn't just pity. It wasn't charity. It was purpose. And for the first time since the day Sarah died, David Mitchell felt like a man worth saving again. The rain had stopped, but the city still looked soaked in sorrow. Clouds hung low over the Chicago skyline, and the streets glistened under the morning light like mirrors reflecting ghosts. David stood by the window of his penthouse, watching the city wake up beneath him. He hadn't changed clothes, hadn't eaten, hadn't even moved since Robert left a few hours earlier. The coffee on the counter had gone cold. Behind him, Emma slept curled up on the couch, her small body still trembling every few minutes as if she were fighting nightmares. How many nights had she slept like that? David wondered. How many nights had no one come when she cried? He turned away from the window, jaw tight. The anger inside him wasn't sharp, it was slow, molten, heavy. Like lava building beneath stone. For 6 months, he'd felt nothing but grief. Now, for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt something else. Purpose. And that purpose had a name. Riverside Children's Home. He grabbed his phone and dialed. The call connected on the second ring. Robert. David, it's barely 6 in the morning. Then it's the perfect time to get started. Robert sighed audibly. You haven't slept. Neither has Emma, David said flatly. She told me things, Robert. Things you won't find in those reports. If half of what she says is true, then Riverside isn't just neglecting kids, it's breaking them. There was silence on the other end. Then, you're sure you want to do this? Because if we dig too deep, the people funding that place won't hesitate to bury you. David's gaze drifted to Emma again. Let them try. 2 hours later, Robert arrived at the penthouse, his briefcase bulging with papers and a laptop under his arm. He looked exhausted but resolved. "I called in a few favors," he said, spreading documents across the counter. "You were right, something's off. Riverside isn't fully government-run. It's managed by a private contractor called Lynbrook Foundation. They get federal funding, but their records are sealed under the guise of child protection privacy laws. I pulled what I could." He slid a folder toward David. "You're not going to like this. Inside were financial statements, adoption records, and donation receipts." The more David read, the colder he felt. "Jesus," he muttered. "They're moving millions through offshore accounts." Robert nodded grimly. "And that's just what we can see. The rest is hidden under shell corporations and charity subsidiaries. My contact at the state office said there have been whispers, kids disappearing before their adoptions were finalized. Most of them were marked as transferred to other homes. No paperwork, no trail." David closed the folder, his hands trembling slightly.
"How many?"
"Too many." A beat of silence hung in the room, heavy and electric. Then Emma's small voice broke through. "You found Tommy?" Both men turned. She stood at the edge of the living room, wrapped in a blanket, her hair a mess, eyes wide with fear and hope. David's heart twisted. "Not yet," he said softly. "But we're going to." She stepped closer. "Promise?" He crouched down so he was eye level with her. "I promise." Her lower lip trembled, but she nodded. "You can't tell them you talked to me," she whispered. "If they find out, they'll come. They always come." The chill that went through David had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "Who comes?" Emma hesitated. "The night van." Robert froze. "What van?" "The one that takes the kids away," Emma said, voice cracking. "It comes late when everyone's sleeping. They wake up the ones the boss picks, tell them they're getting a family. But they never come back. Tommy said one boy tried to hide. They took him anyway. He screamed so loud they had to." She stopped, eyes brimming with tears, David's hands clenched into fists. Robert swallowed hard. "David, if that's true, we're not just dealing with corruption. We're dealing with something much bigger." David stood, his expression like stone. "Then we'll get bigger." By afternoon, the penthouse had transformed into a war room. Robert worked at the kitchen island, cross-referencing public contracts and donor databases. David was on the phone with his head of security, pulling strings only a billionaire could. "I need everything on Lynbrook Foundation," he ordered. "Private investigators, former employees, vendors, anyone who's ever cashed a check from them discreetly." His assistant hesitated. "Sir, may I ask why?" "You can," David said coldly. "Just don't expect an answer." He hung up and turned to Robert. "What about the media?" Robert looked uneasy. "If we go public too soon, they'll destroy you first. You're a grieving widower with too much money and a runaway child in your home. They'll make you look like a predator before they ever look at Riverside." David nodded slowly. "Then we don't go public. Then what's the plan?" He looked toward Emma, who was sitting cross-legged on the couch, sketching something on a napkin. A crude drawing of two stick figures holding hands. One taller, one smaller. "We take them down from the inside." Robert frowned. "You're not serious." "Oh, I'm deadly serious." He moved to the window, staring out at the skyline. "Riverside's director, Langford, right? She's the one approving these transfers?" "Yes. Then we start with her. If she's hiding something, we'll find it. If she's hurting kids, we'll end her." Robert exhaled. "You're talking about going to war with a system that has judges, cops, and politicians on its payroll." David's voice was ice. "Then they'll all burn together." That night, while Emma slept again, David sat alone by the fire, reading through every page Robert had gathered. Photos of missing children, paper trails leading to fake orphanages, adoption files ending in dead ends. Each page stoked the rage inside him higher, hotter. Then he found it. A name. Tommy Reynolds, age 5, transfer scheduled. His pulse surged.
"Robert," he called out. Robert appeared from the study.
"What is it?" David pointed to the file. "They've already processed him. The paperwork says he's been moved to foster evaluation. But there's no address, no receiving family, no contact info." Robert paled. "That means he's next." David stood, the papers trembling in his hands. "Then we move first." Outside, the storm began again, lightning cracking across the skyline, thunder rolling like distant drums. Inside the penthouse, David Mitchell stared into the darkness beyond the glass. Somewhere out there, a terrified 5-year-old boy was about to vanish like so many others before him. He turned back toward the sleeping girl on the couch. He'd already lost one family. He would not lose another. The billionaire everyone thought had died with his wife was gone. In his place stood something else. A man reborn through rage, purpose, and love, and as thunder shook the city, David whispered to the night, "They took my peace. They won't take her brother." The war for Riverside had begun. The brother. The sky above Chicago looked bruised, a canvas of storm clouds swirling over the skyline like the prelude to something terrible. The wind had shifted, colder, meaner, carrying the scent of rain and asphalt. The city buzzed below, unaware that somewhere above it all, a man who'd lost everything was about to risk everything again. David Mitchell stood at his floor-to-ceiling window, dressed in black. The same raincoat he'd worn the night he met Emma hung from his shoulders. His reflection stared back at him. Haunted eyes, steady hands, a look that had nothing left of the broken widower from weeks before. Behind him, the lights in the penthouse glowed low and golden. Emma sat on the couch with her knees tucked up to her chest, clutching a small stuffed bear that wasn't hers. She'd found it in the hotel's lost and found 2 days earlier and decided it was Tommy's stand-in until they found the real one. David's phone buzzed. It was Robert. They moved him, Robert said without preamble. I traced the fake adoption paperwork to a processing home outside the city. A place called Haven Ridge. It's not officially on record, but the same foundation that funds Riverside funds them too. They're linked, David. David's grip on the phone tightened. Location? Southside. Near the old freight yard. And you're not going alone. David turned. I wasn't planning to. His gaze landed on Emma. She looked up from the bear. You found him. We found him, David corrected softly. For the first time, she smiled. Not a faint smile, not one of those shy, fragile ones, but real, radiant, alive. Can I come? The question hit him like a gut punch. Emma, no. It's too dangerous, her chin lifted in defiance. He'll be scared if I'm not there. He doesn't trust grown-ups, David knelt down. He'll trust me. You're not me, she said quietly. The words hung there, simple, raw, true. Robert's voice came through the phone again. David, she's right. If Tommy's traumatized, seeing his sister might be the only thing that calms him. Just keep her out of sight when you get there. David exhaled. All right. But the moment anything goes wrong, you run. Understand? Emma nodded. Promise. They left the hotel after midnight when the city had quieted into its eerie, sleepless hum. The rain had stopped but left the world dripping, reflective. Every light doubled on the wet pavement. The black SUV Robert had arranged was waiting out front. The driver was one of David's men from Mitchell Security, a man named Harris, ex-military, eyes like iron. Mr. Mitchell, Harris said, holding the door. You're sure about this? Never been more sure of anything in my life. They drove south in silence. Chicago's glittering skyline faded behind them, replaced by warehouses, graffiti-smeared alleys, and flickering neon signs. Emma pressed her face to the window, her small hands clutching the bear. Is this where Tommy is? She whispered. David glanced at her. Yes, but we have to be careful. You remember what you told me about the van? Her eyes darkened. The night van. That's the one, he said. We're going to stop it before it ever finds him again. Haven Ridge sat at the end of a cracked road, hidden behind chain-link fences and rotting wooden signs that read, private property. The building looked less like a home and more like a forgotten institution, a square of stone and shadow, lit by a single flickering lamp near the entrance. David's chest tightened. He recognized that kind of silence, the kind that felt alive as though the building itself were watching. Harris parked a few blocks away. David reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small device. Body cam, he said. Robert's setting up a live feed in case this goes south. Emma's hand found his sleeve. Please, she whispered. Don't let them see you, he smiled faintly. I'm not the one they should be afraid of. They slipped out of the car, keeping low. The night air was thick and electric, heavy with the smell of rust and decay. Somewhere in the distance a train horn wailed, As they approached the gate, a single security guard leaned against the fence, smoking. Harris moved like a shadow, and the guard never even saw him coming. A silent takedown, a muffled grunt, and the path was clear. David turned to Emma. "Stay behind me. No noise." She nodded, her eyes wide and focused, her small hand gripping the bear tighter. They slipped inside. The hallways were dim and smelled of bleach and mold. The walls were lined with closed doors, each labeled with a number. Somewhere down the hall, a child coughed. Another whimpered. David's stomach turned. He and Harris moved fast and quiet, checking each room. Empty beds, broken toys, cabinets of outdated medicine, then faintly a voice. "Emma." David froze. It was a boy's voice. Small, sleepy, scared Emma gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "Tommy," she whispered. The sound came from behind a half-open door at the end of the hall. David moved first, pushing the door open slowly. Inside, under a thin blanket, sat a boy no older than 5, tiny, pale, clutching a ragged blue blanket. His eyes met Emma's, and for a heartbeat he didn't believe what he saw. Then she ran to him. "Tommy." He leapt from the bed, sobbing, into her arms. "I knew you'd come," he cried. "I told them you'd find me." David stood at the doorway, his throat tight, his vision blurring. For a brief, blinding moment, he saw Sarah again, her arms open, smiling at a future they never got to live. But the moment shattered when Harris hissed, "We've got company." Footsteps. Heavy ones. Langford's voice echoed down the hall. "Check the west wing. Someone's here." Emma froze. Tommy whimpered. David pulled them close. "Harris, out the back now." They darted down a side corridor, Tommy clinging to Emma, Emma gripping David's coat. Lights flared on behind them. Voices shouted, "Go!" David urged, shoving Harris ahead. "Get them to the car." "What about you?" Harris growled. "I'll buy us time." David, "No, move." Harris scooped up both children, running. Emma screamed his name, but David didn't look back. He turned toward the approaching figures instead. 3 men in dark uniforms, guns drawn. "Hands where I can see them," one barked. David raised his hands slowly. The red laser dots from their rifles trembled on his chest. "Where are the kids?" the man demanded. David smiled grimly. "Far from you." Before the man could respond, David lunged. Years of gym training and suppressed rage exploded into motion. One guard went down hard, gun clattering. The second fired, but David ducked behind a desk, grabbed a chair and slammed it into him with enough force to shatter wood. The last man tried to radio in, but David yanked the cord, punching him square in the jaw. When the hallway finally fell silent, he was panting, drenched in sweat and adrenaline. Sirens wailed outside. He bolted through the side door and froze just as a black van screeched to a stop. Near the back fence, the night van. Its headlights blazed through the dark, illuminating the painted words "Riverside Transport Services." The rear doors burst open. David raised his gun. Not this time. He fired once, then again, blowing out the tires. The van swerved, crashed into the fence, and stopped. From the road he heard Harris shout, "We've got them!" David sprinted toward the sound of Emma's voice, his lungs burning. The SUV's doors were open, the children safe inside, Harris behind the wheel. As David dove in and slammed the door shut, the vehicle roared to life. Emma threw her arms around him, sobbing. "You found him. You really found him." David's heart was pounding like thunder. He hugged them both close, whispering hoarsely, "I promised, didn't I?" Behind them, Haven Ridge burned. Flames licked at the windows as smoke filled the sky, the sirens growing distant. In the rearview mirror, David watched the building collapse in firelight, and as Emma fell asleep clutching Tommy, her head against his shoulder, David looked out at the endless dark road ahead. He knew this wasn't over. Riverside still lived. Langford still lived, and the world would soon know exactly what they had done. Exposing the lie, morning light bled through the curtains of the safe house like a bruise. Dust floated in the slanted rays of gold and gray, and for a moment the world seemed still, too still, as if holding its breath before collapsing again. Emma sat cross-legged on the bed beside her sleeping brother. Tommy's tiny chest rose and fell beneath the blanket, his small fingers curled around hers. She didn't move, afraid that if she did, he might disappear again, like all the other kids who were taken away and never came back. In the next room, David stood by the window with his back to them, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, tight with exhaustion and fury. "Robert, tell me you have something." A pause. Then, "I have everything, and that's the problem." David turned. His reflection in the window looked hollow, haunted. "What do you mean?" "They know. Someone leaked it. The footage from Haven Ridge, the fire, the van, and everything. The police think you burned that facility to destroy evidence." "That's insane," David hissed. "We were saving them." "I know," Robert said quietly. "But that's not what the headlines say." David's stomach sank. "What do the headlines say?" Robert's sigh was long, tired, and heavy. "Billionaire tech tycoon kidnaps orphans, torches state facility." The words hit like a bullet. David pressed a hand to his forehead, the world spinning around him. "Jesus Christ. They're painting you as a vigilante with a savior complex. They're saying you were using the kids as pawns for your own guilt after Sarah's death." David didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth didn't matter to the world, only the story. He hung up and turned toward the bedroom. Emma was standing in the doorway now, watching him. "Are they coming for us?" she asked. Her voice wasn't afraid. It was tired, too tired for a child. David forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Not if I can help it." She tilted her head, studying him. "You're lying." He almost laughed because she was right. "Maybe a little." Emma's lips trembled. "They'll take Tommy away again, won't they?" "Not while I'm alive." She stepped closer, her small hand brushing against his. "You don't have to protect us alone." Something in her tone broke him open. This child, this fragile, brave, heartbreakingly old-souled child, had learned to be stronger than adults who should have protected her. He crouched down and met her eyes. "Emma," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "you're just a kid. You shouldn't have to be brave all the time." Tears welled in her eyes and she whispered, "But if I'm not brave, who will be?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Her small body shook against him, and for a long moment he just held her, the way he had that night in the rain. But this time it wasn't pretend. By evening, the safe house had become a prison of silence. The television hummed softly from the corner, news anchors dissecting every second of David's downfall. David Mitchell, once hailed as one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country, now faces criminal investigation after the mysterious fire that destroyed Haven Ridge, an unregistered children's facility linked to a major adoption network. Emma turned away from the screen, covering Tommy's ears. "Make them stop," she whispered. David muted the TV, his expression stone. "I'll fix it," he murmured. "You can't fix everything," she said, her voice trembling. "You're not magic," he smiled faintly. "No," he said. "Just stubborn." Outside, sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. They were getting closer. Robert's call came minutes later. "You need to go. They've issued a warrant." David's pulse thundered. "How long do I have?" "Maybe an hour," Robert said. "I can buy you more time. But if they find the kids, they'll separate them. You can't let that happen." David's eyes darkened with resolve. "Then we disappear." The drive out of the city felt endless. Rain began again, soft, steady, almost sorrowful. Emma sat in the back seat, Tommy asleep on her lap, the stuffed bear tucked beneath his chin. David's hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Every passing mile pulled him further from the world he'd built and deeper into the one he didn't understand. He didn't know what came next, only that he couldn't lose them. Emma watched the city lights fade in the rearview mirror. "David?" "Yeah?" "Why are they saying bad things about you?" He hesitated. "Because sometimes the truth scares people. It's easier to call a good thing bad than admit the world's broken." She nodded thoughtfully. "That's stupid," he laughed softly, despite everything. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Then her voice turned small again. "You're gonna leave us, aren't you?" The question ripped through him. "No," he said fiercely. "I already lost one family. I won't lose another." She stared at him, her big brown eyes glistening. "You talk like my daddy used to." David swallowed hard. "What was he like?" She smiled weakly. "He used to carry me on his shoulders. Said I'd see the whole world someday." David's chest ached. He was right. The car was silent for a while after that, save for the rain and the hum of tires on wet asphalt. But beneath that silence lived something deeper. A bond forged not by blood but by love, loss, and fire. They reached a small cabin near the edge of the forest, one of David's old properties untouched for years. He led them inside, lit a fire, and tucked the children into a single bed. Emma stirred once before falling asleep, whispering, "You're not like the others." David brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Neither are you." He stayed awake long after they drifted into dreams, sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. The world outside thought he was a monster. The law thought he was a criminal. The headlines called him insane, but none of that mattered. Because in that tiny cabin, in the soft crackle of the firelight, a man who'd lost everything found something far more powerful than redemption. He found reason. He looked over at the two sleeping children, their faces peaceful in the glow, and for the first time in years, David Mitchell prayed, not for forgiveness, not for justice, just for time. Time to make things right. Time to give them the life they deserved. He knew the storm was far from over, the truth still buried, the world still against him. But as he watched Emma's small hand resting protectively on her brother's shoulder, he understood something simple, something Sarah had once told him long ago. Sometimes love doesn't save you. It remakes you. David closed his eyes. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the world hunted him. Inside, two little hearts finally slept without fear. And somewhere deep in the night, the story of the billionaire and the orphan girl became something more than survival. It became love, reborn in the ruins. The hug that saved them both. The world burned with headlines before it healed. For weeks, David Mitchell's name lived on every screen, every broadcast, every whispered conversation. The billionaire kidnapper, the fallen hero, the man who lost everything, twice. But the world had never been good at seeing truth through smoke until the fire cleared. It began quietly. A single leaked video, uploaded anonymously at 2:14 a.m., a grainy body cam recording showing guards dragging children through the halls of Riverside. Another clip of the night van loading its terrified passengers. Then the unthinkable empty footage from Haven Ridge before the fire. Cages, forged documents, terrified children begging not to be sent away. By dawn, it was everywhere. Riverside scandal, billionaire's kidnapping leads to national investigation. The world gasped, then wept, then turned, not against David, but for him. Within 48 hours, the FBI raided Riverside Children's Home. Ms. Langford was arrested while trying to flee the state. Every executive at the Lynbrook Foundation followed. Politicians who once shook her hand denied ever meeting her, and at the center of the storm stood David Mitchell, silent, steady, unbroken. The trial took months. Robert Chen sat beside him every day, stacks of files and evidence lined like armor on the table. Across the courtroom, Emma and Tommy sat under the protective eye of social services, their little hands intertwined. Each day they watched him with the same question in their eyes. "Will you come back for us?" And each day he met that gaze with a promise. Yes. The prosecution tried to paint him as reckless, unstable, emotionally unfit. But then Emma took the stand. The courtroom went still. The 7-year-old girl, her legs barely reaching the floor, looked up at the judge and began to speak. Her voice shook at first. But when she said, "He didn't kidnap me. He saved me." Something in the air changed. She told them everything. About Riverside, about the van, about Tommy's screams and her nights locked in the dark. About the man who didn't even know her but wrapped his arms around her in the rain and said, "You're safe now." She ended with a whisper, barely audible over her tears. When I met him, I asked him to pretend to hug me, but he didn't pretend. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge's eyes glistened. Robert leaned toward David and murmured, "That little girl just did what 10 lawyers couldn't." David didn't answer. His throat was too tight. 3 months later, the charges were dropped. His name was cleared. The same media that once crucified him now hailed him as the man who had exposed one of the largest child trafficking rings in U.S. history. The billionaire, who chose compassion over power. The headlines read, "Mitchell Technologies Board begged him to return." He didn't. Instead, he founded the Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Children, dedicated to reforming the foster system that had failed kids like Emma and Tommy. But the day that mattered most wasn't the one with flashing cameras or reporters. shouting his name. It was the quiet morning when he stood outside a family court in downtown Chicago, waiting for a single ruling. Emma fidgeted beside him, dressed in a pale blue dress Robert had bought her. Tommy held her hand, his tiny fingers stained with blue crayon. The door opened. The judge stepped out, papers in hand. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, smiling. "Congratulations." The sound Emma made, half laugh, half sob, filled the hallway. "You mean?" The judge nodded. "You're officially their father." David froze. His breath caught somewhere between disbelief and joy. Emma launched herself into his arms, crying into his chest. "You did it," she sobbed. He held her tight, one arm wrapped around Tommy, too, tears slipping down his face unchecked. "No," he whispered. "We did it." That evening, the three of them returned to the lakefront, the same place where rain had once bound them together. The city glowed gold in the distance, skyscrapers catching the last light of sunset. The lake shimmered like liquid fire. Emma sat beside David on a park bench, Tommy asleep on his lap. For the first time, she looked truly at peace. She stared across the water. "Do you think she'd be happy?" David blinked. "Who?" "Sarah," she said softly. "Your wife. The one in the picture." David smiled, slow and trembling. More than happy. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folder, yellowed, worn. He handed it to her. "What's that?" He hesitated, then said, "Something I only just found out." Emma opened it. Inside was an adoption form, half completed, dated nearly a year before Sarah's death. The names written neatly across the top: Emma Reynolds, age 6, Tommy Reynolds, age 4. Emma's breath hitched. Her eyes filled with tears. "She wanted us?" David nodded. "She found your file at an orphanage. Said she couldn't stop thinking about you both. She was supposed to finalize it the week she—" His voice broke. Emma stared down at the paper, then looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Then she found us first." David nodded again, his throat burning. Emma reached out, tears streaming freely now, and wrapped her small arms around him. The same way she had that night in the rain. Only this time it wasn't fear. It wasn't desperation. It was love, pure, full, and real. Tommy stirred in his sleep, mumbling, "Daddy?" David's heart clenched. He kissed both their heads. "Yeah, buddy," he whispered. "I'm here." The sun dipped below the lake, leaving streaks of gold fading into indigo. And in that fading light, where one family had ended and another had begun, David Mitchell finally understood. The hug that had once saved Emma's life had saved his too. The rain had washed away everything broken, everything lost. What remained was love forever,